it's nice to be comfortable sitting wherever you want to sit, that you're comfortable and you can still stay fairly alert and awake. Sometimes these evening sittings are not easy to stay awake in, but that's okay. Sit where you're comfortable and find a position that can be as comfortable as possible. Sometimes people need to lie down for a little bit, or stand up and walk, or open your eyes a little. So I will just start by ringing this bell. And letting the sound of the bell bring us to the Dhamma, bring us to our noble seating position. And it's nice to acknowledge in the beginning of the sit, as we create our container of safety and strength and courage, to acknowledge the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha. And so we acknowledge those enlightened ones, the most recent Sakyamuni Buddha that we have had the teachings from, and all the many Buddhas who went before him for eons of time. We just acknowledge those beings that have discovered freedom for themselves, and also pay homage to the Dhamma, the teachings that, in this case, the Buddha so graciously gave us. He had a lot to think about after his enlightenment as to how or if he was going to present anything to those around him, because I think what he discovered was so hard to describe. And the fact that he managed to funnel it down to the Four Noble Truths, and the idea of seeing with insight, seeing clearly, or the word vipassana, seeing clearly for ourselves that discomfort and suffering exists, and that if we cling to what we want to have repeat itself or like, and if we push away things that we don't like, we will find ourselves in turmoil and in dis-ease. So we acknowledge the teachings and the purity of the teachings that have been passed down through generations of monks and nuns and lay people. And that brings us to the Sangha, to the happiness of having each other to sit with, other larger Sanghas. We have gratitude and pay homage to the monks and nuns and lay people over generations and generations and generations of time, and the blessings of being born human in this birth so that we can hear the teachings. And so just allowing ourselves to find whatever noble position is comfortable, allowing the eyes to close or stay partially open, letting light in, letting relaxation flow through the body, relaxing behind the eyes, around the face, in the jaw. Just noticing where there are tensions in the body. Often as soon as we acknowledge them, they change. We can let the shoulders be noticed, and our backs, our buttocks, letting gravity come in if we're sitting, noticing gravity in our seated position, and letting that relaxation of energy flow down our legs and feet, noticing the pressure of the floor against our feet. There may be pressure, denseness, or lightness. There can be heat or cool. We can feel it at our feet. We can feel it at our buttocks. We can feel those things at touch points throughout our body, bringing us into the present moment. Noticing that there is different kind of sensations at each of the sense doors. And often there's warmth and coolness. There's density, spaciousness, tingling, whatever is your own experience, noticing pressure at the sits points or the standing points. Sometimes this is noticed at the breath. And it's helpful to have a single object to put the attention on. It can be at the breath, at the nostrils, and it can be at the breath, at the belly, noticing expansion and contraction, pressure, being present with whatever sensation is arising. And as we settle into the chosen single object, if it's the breath or the touch point, sometimes it's remembering some quality, a skillful mind state. Sometimes it's reflecting on some of the teachings of the Buddha. Wherever our attention is, we bring mindfulness there. We can be relaxed and be aware. We can take our time settling, being easeful, kind to ourselves, and holding ourselves gently as we attend to the present moment awareness. We may notice our attention wander from our single object. Oftentimes we might go into whatever might be sensations in the body. There might be thoughts in the mind. We can just notice that right where we are, waking up in that moment. We can notice in each moment, whenever we find ourselves coming back to mindfulness. There may be a feeling in that moment of pleasant or unpleasant, or maybe we can't tell, unknown or confusing. We just can't see, but we're aware. We wake up in each moment wherever we've wandered without any judgment, and we can just be right there with that moment, going from each object, or we can go back to that single object of the breath or the touch point to begin and continue with mindfulness at the fore and awareness present. Acknowledging the generosity it takes that we show ourselves in choosing to do this now instead of the many other things we might be doing. That can bring gladdening to the heart, to the mind. Relaxing the body and calming the mind happens naturally as our attention settles down and our concentration increases. But sometimes there's a lot on the mind. There might be restlessness or worry. There might be tiredness in the mind, various hindrances, grasping at something that we like the way it feels, or pushing away something that we don't like how it's unfolding in the mind. We can just notice these. They're natural. They are inherent in us being born in this human existence of these various, as the Buddha called them, hindrances. There are other names for them, defilements, because they defile the mind from being clear. But we can just notice it without berating ourselves. Whatever arises in the mind, that's what's present in the mind. What arises in the body, that's what's happening in the body. And it's our attitude toward it. That is influential to our well-being and our happiness. And so we might ask ourselves from time to time, what is the attitude of the mind right now? Not needing to have a long storyline explaining everything, but just noticing with awareness, knowledge, knowing firsthand, being present with what arises, seeing that it is impermanent and arises as long as conditions come together. It's there for a certain amount of time. It's impermanent and it passes away. Sometimes we may notice there's some discomfort happening somewhere, maybe in our bodies, in our posture. We may even feel like we need to move. Before we do, we can be present with intention. We can notice the intention that occurs in the mind, the desire that occurs, the craving that occurs to want to change something. And then what happens as we begin finally to change something, shift slightly, or move, the creation of a new moment. And so we add intention before becoming, intention before the movement. And sometimes we can see intention in the mind. We can notice the movement in the mind. As a thought is arising. And we have wisdom and investigation that arises. Awareness alone is not enough, but wisdom can help us see if something is a skillful or unskillful direction to lean in. And we make choices from there. Sometimes we may notice constricting in the mind around something happening in the body or the mind. And when we ask, what's the attitude of the mind, and we see that there's some density or some discomfort there, we can also then notice that and incline our hearts and minds toward kindness for ourselves or compassion for ourselves as some challenging mind state might arise. And we notice that. We may see that it's impermanent and changing and not personal. We can't hang on to it. It doesn't really belong to us. And we carry on, seeing what arises, attending to that single object, inhabiting the container of our breath body, anchored in the body, present and aware. When we've roamed away from the present moment, we just wake up where we are, acknowledging that moment of wakefulness. Gladdens the mind, brings happiness to the mind. We're awakening to this present moment, whatever it's bringing us. In the present moment with mindfulness and awareness, kindness and compassion, holding ourselves gently in awareness as wisdom arises and investigates what is present, what is in the center of our attention, investigating its nature. Warm or cool, rough or smooth, dense, light, spacious, sparkly, not sparkly. In our bodies, in our minds, just being relaxed, a natural openness with just enough effort to be aware and alert. And if sometimes that wavers, we can open our eyes. We may notice one of the other senses. We could notice hearing coming to the ears. We can notice without grasping at naming sight that comes to the eyes with a soft gaze, or touching that comes to any of the touch points. We stay in our senses. We're grounded in the body, and all conditions that arise are known to us from each of our sense doors. The purity of sound without naming it comes to our ears, or the purity of seeing comes to the eye door, touching, and the same with tasting and smelling, and the thought door. Thoughts arise. They pass away. We may notice grasping or clinging, or they may be equanimity as thoughts arise and flow on, arise and flow on, quickly changing objects. If we're lost in thought or daydreaming, or having sleepiness and torpor in the mind, we can just begin again, come back to the present moment, notice right then and there what might be happening in the mind and in the body. Go back to that single object or connect with anchoring in the whole body of the breath and noticing whatever comes to any of the senses with interest, with awareness, and bringing wisdom. We can appreciate that we are here in this moment and we're paying attention. We're using mindfulness and awareness, inclining the mind toward these skillful states. And sometimes when we get lost, perhaps in negative thinking or a storyline we've had many times before, we can gently notice, oh, this brings contraction into the mind. Or if we incline our heart and mind in this direction, there's more gentleness, there's more kindness for ourselves, there's more openness. The mind can relax. We may notice tensions in the body. As soon as we notice them somewhere, they can let go a little more on their own accord. And that's where we may notice renunciation, that things fall away on their own accord. We don't have to push them away. They They just fall away naturally. We can incline the mind from time to time toward any of the beautiful states of mind, the PIMCs you've heard mentioned before. We've been embracing generosity and harmonious living of sila. We can notice renunciation when things fall away on their own accord. We notice that we are freeing ourselves from an immediate sorrow that might be present. That's natural renunciation, and wisdom is present. Inclining the mind toward the good, noticing that when things are difficult, sometimes turning away from what isn't as skillful for us without aversion. Wisdom just recognizes the difference between skillful and unskillful. And we have just the right amount of energy, effort to persevere. We have patience. We can notice truthfulness. How we're honestly being with ourselves in the present moment. Nurturing resolve for wisdom and for truth, for generosity, the resolve for peace in the mind. And we have loving kindness. Wishing goodwill to ourselves and others. Sometimes we notice equanimity, that we can see what arises, whether it's comfortable or uncomfortable, and not have aversion or attachment to it, not having attachment to the pleasant moments and not pushing away the unpleasant moments. All of these qualities of inner beauty, inclining the mind toward the beautiful states of mind, are skillful activities of the mind. And as we are aware of these coming and going throughout our sit, coming and going throughout our lives, we can bring happiness joyousness, gladdening of the mind, to noticing, holding ourselves in a kind of kindness, appreciation. That we may be free from harm and have happiness and the causes of happiness. And just this time, and any time you spend formally meditating or being mindfully aware in your daily life, noticing that kindness to yourself, the happiness that comes to the mind. And as we hold this kindness, this well-being in our heart space, in the cauldron of our body, our breath body, we find room there to include another person, a teacher or a close friend. Imagining this person in your mind's eye. Letting your heart and mind incline toward kindness and well-being, wishing them to be free from harm, safe and protected, and have ease. Letting this expansion of our hearts include another friend or a benefactor, perhaps a teacher, someone who first brought us to meditating, someone who first helped us see clearly, the arising and passing away of moments of awareness. Seeing this next person, holding them in our hearts. It may be a sense, a felt sense in the heart. You may like repeating a phrase, a simple phrase, may you be free from harm, or may you have happiness, or may you be peaceful and have well-being. Or it could just be the word metta, for loving kindness, well-wishing for this friend and or benefactor. Still noticing the breath and the body, the groundedness of the body. Sometimes it's nice to put your hand on your heart to be reminded of keeping our hearts open, letting this kindness live within us. This generosity to ourselves and to others. Training the heart and mind to include another person, setting aside ourselves and our friend or our teacher, and having a neutral person come into our heart space. Someone we saw today, maybe it's someone in our own circle here that we don't know, someone we saw walking outside our window or crossing the street. We could expand this kindness to a group of neutral people, those that we don't know that may be in suffering or in sickness, or those who may be oppressed, those that may be forced from their homes, or just the single person, however your heart feels you can hold this neutral category, wishing for kindness, well-being, letting that heartfelt wish embody our concentration to include them, opening our hearts. Just as I wish to be happy, I know that you also wish to be happy. And if we can let this heartfelt energy incline toward a broader circle in directions of the east and the south, of the west and in the north. The classical teachings are all beings everywhere, omitting none. Tall, medium, and short. All genders. All beings above and below. Those in the water, those in the skies. Those known and unknown, seen and unseen. May all these beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. Be free from suffering. May they know their true nature. Anicca vata sankhara upadavaya domino upakitawa meruchanti te samvapasamo sukho. That's Pali, the language that the Buddha used for his teachings, which translated means all conditioned things are subject to impermanence. They arise and pass away. And seeing this clearly with mindfulness brings the greatest happiness, which is peace. And once again, I'll ring the bell and let the sound just arrive, the purity of the sound just arrive at the ears. As we gently let our eyes open and let light come in, just noticing what comes to the eyes, what happens in the mind, as we start noticing conditions arising, and just softly letting our eyes gaze upon each other in our circle to let that kindness flow to each other and to some of our friends on Facebook, like Luba, who's watching. And I'm going to take this moment to tell Facebook people to come back in 5 minutes because I'm going to turn it off.